When you sign into Figma, getting started creating a new file is as easy as clicking one of these three buttons here. But you may have multiple files that you want to be grouped into one project. So to get started creating a new project, you first have to click on this new team icon here and create a team for your project. Now in this course, we're going to be creating a chef recipes app. So I'm going to go ahead and name this team the chef team. And if you don't want to start out paying the $12 a month, you can just start with this free starter program. So I'll get started for free here. And you can see here we have the chef team. And now I can start my first project. I'm going to call this the chef recipe project. And when you start this new project, you can decide whether everybody on the team can edit, view, or if you want to just choose who has access in the future. So I'm going to allow everybody on the chef team to edit. And now I'll create this project here. And now that this project is started, we could create new files, one for the iPhone app, one for the website, and one for marketing material. So that's how projects work. The first file that we're going to create in our project is the chef recipes app. So we can name this file by clicking on the text here. We'll just name this chef_recipe app. And now if we go back to the start page, we can see that we have that file here inside of our projects that is inside of the chef team. In the last video, we created a brand new project and a new file, the chef_recipe_app. But what if you've started your project already inside of a program like Sketch? Or what if you want to start with a template and build your designs out from there? Figma does really good with importing sketch files and maintains the quality and the layering scheme that you would expect. To give you an example of this, I'm going to go into our exercise files under the assets folder. And you can see we have a recipe app template sketch file here that we can import. Now you can drag and drop any sketch file directly into this project, or you can browse the way that I did and click open. And while this is loading, this happens to be a template that I found on a website called Sketch App Sources. Now Sketch App Sources have tons of templates, whether it's the iOS template guidelines, material design. You can see some Tesla dashboards here. So feel free to go onto this website and browse these thousands of templates, and if there's something that you like with a certain flavor that matches where you'd like to start, you can click download resource here and then import it later here into Figma. Now that this is imported, we'll click done, and now we can see this template here, and if we double click inside of here, we can see how this looks. Now one of the first things that we can see is we may not have the fonts that were used in this template. So you can go online and find these, or use Typekit to find the certain fonts and load them before you get started with your design. Or you can just dismiss this and update your fonts later. We can see that this sketch template had two pages. If we click on here, we can see a symbols page and then a page 1. So this is where they retained all of their symbols inside Sketch. And these symbols are converted into master components, which is really great. We're going to go back to page 1 here, and we can see these different frames, and we see that the background is gray, so we have a hard time distinguishing the boundaries between some of these frames. So all we have to do is go to this background area and change this to be light gray, and we can kind of see the contrast there between the frames and the background here. And another thing that you notice is, although it retains a lot of the layering schemes and some of this font here, there are times where some layers may not import correctly. So if we go to this login and sign up, for example, there's some missing text here between the login and sign up button and things like that. So it may be worth your while to open up the Sketch program and find the few layers that may be missing and add those in manually. But you can see how much time this will save you getting started with Figma if you're starting with a Sketch file. In a previous video, we set up a team, and that's this chef team. And this is where we set up a project here for our chef recipe app. If you skipped this video, you can click here to set up a new team and name this team whatever you want. I'm going to hit cancel here because I already have one created, but if you haven't, go ahead and create this team. And once you do, you'll get this little view here for your team. And you can see inside of this chef's team, I have one project here, but I don't have any team members working with me. To really harness the power of Figma, I want to invite a new team member here. So I'm going to click on this invite a team member. And I'm just going to type in somebody's email. You can type in multiple people's email in this text field, and then you can choose what access they have to the projects inside of this team. So whether they're an admin of the team, or they can edit any projects within this team, or only view. So here I'm going to give them admin access, and I'll just click invite here. Their name and their avatar is going to be grayed out until they accept my invite. And once they do, they'll see the same team here when they log into Figma. They'll see all the projects that you're seeing, and they can click at any time and edit regardless of if someone already has this project open. If you have any questions or would like help throughout this course, feel free to add me as a team member inside of your projects as well. You can add me at caleb@brainspin.com. And once I accept your invite, you will be able to use the comment feature to ask me specific questions, and I can jump in and help you resolve them. After she's accepted the invite, you can see the name and avatar here. So now if I click on my chef recipe project here, we can see that we have these two files here, and we've invited one member to our team. And now we can see Marlene is in this file here. So if I want to collaborate with her, I can double click, and you'll see her mouse here and her avatar here saying that she's actually interacting with the design. So now we're going to ask her to drag this home artboard around, and you can see her dragging that live. And if you want to follow her mouse while she's doing that, just click on her avatar here, and it'll follow her as she interacts with things. So maybe drag that back up to the top here, and you get a nice view here of what she's doing. And this is really helpful if your background has 100 artboards and you're not sure where she's interacting with a certain artboard. Just click on this name here, and it'll zoom the canvas right into where she's working. So now I've asked Marlene to add some text into the sign in and sign up buttons, so she's going to go ahead and do that now. And while she's filling in that content, I can style this for her. So let me zoom in here, and I can see that she already typed this sign in button, so I can go in here and change this to be white, change the font size to be 16, and if I want to start out with this size, I can hold down Option Command C to copy this style, Option Command V to paste it over here, and then I just want to change this color. So I'm going to change this to the same orange right here and get started here. So you can see how easy and how close I can be designing with her as she's creating content and I'm stylizing it. And then I can go and hold down Option and bring this text over here for sign in and here for sign in. And this is also very helpful if you're on an online screen sharing session with a client or with a collaborator, to have them open up the Figma as you are, and you guys both designing together as you're discussing your project is very powerful and very helpful. Inside the Assets folder under Exercise Files, you'll find this Design Templates text file. Now this text file just has a link to these 4 resources here to find design templates. And these templates come in very handy. For example, if you're designing for iOS 11, you can go to developer.apple.com, and they have design resources in this link here for Sketch, for Adobe XD, for other design files. And remember, if it is a Sketch file, you can import that directly into Figma and start from there. Alternatively, if you're designing for Android, you can get the material design template here in material.io. And these 2 links below are community resources for Sketch files and for Figma files. So take a minute to visit these links and familiarize yourself with a few templates, because it could really help save some time. For example, if you download the iOS 11 design template from developer.apple.com, you get this folder, and not only does it give you the sketch files here, the production templates, but it also gives you the fonts used inside of this template, so you don't find missing fonts once you load this up into Figma. So you can click inside here, you can see that we have all of the San Francisco Pro font packages that come with the iPhone design. Then we have production templates here that are for app icons or for navigation flows. In the last folder here we have UI elements, designs, and guidelines, and you can hit the spacebar on a Mac and kind of see a preview of the elements that you're going to get once you import this template into Figma. I would highly encourage you to save these links in your bookmarks folder, because as you're continuing to design, these are going to come in very handy. Okay, by now you've learned the interface and you've learned how to set up a project. And now you should have the skills that you need to begin working with content and begin developing an app. As you can see in this image here, I've already sketched the kind of design that we're going to be creating inside of Figma. I sketched this on my iPad, and this is available in your assets folder as well as a PNG. And now it's time to get our hands dirty adding some content. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into Figma here, and in a previous video we already set up a chef_recipe_app file, but if you haven't done this yet, you can just click on new file here and get started from scratch with us. If you do create a new file, I'm just going to open up this file that we have. Your file name should say untitled right here, so to change that, just click inside of this text area and you can name this whatever you'd like. So now we have this new fresh file here. Anytime that you'd like to, you can go into the assets folder and find this PNG image and just open it up for reference as we begin designing. So the first thing we're going to do is set up 5 frames because we know those are the artboards we're going to start out with. So to create new frames, we can click on this frame tool here, and rather than dragging a custom shape like we're doing here, I'm just going to hit delete, and we can go into here in the presets, and I know I'm going to be designing for the iPhone 8, so I'm just going to click on this preset here for an iPhone 8 frame. Now if I hold down Command and scroll down, you can zoom out here, and I'm just going to hold down Option as I drag this 4 other times. Okay, so now we have 5 artboards, and one thing that you can do to make your frames even is hold down Shift and select all of them, and then we can use this distribute horizontal spacing here. So now we have some even spacing, it looks really nice. The next thing we want to do is name our frames. So we can click on the name here, and if the frame is blank, you can always click inside of the frame to drag it around, but once you add some content in here, like a rectangle for example, now if I click inside of this area, I can't drag it anymore. I have to click on the name here to drag it around. So I'll delete this. Now let's just name our frames. The first one's going to be the splash screen. Second one is home. Third is recipe. And I'll just name this recipe details. And this will be recipe details complete. And the last one here we'll name menu. So we have our 5 artboards, and you can drag these around very easily to reorder or reorganize them as you're going along. And now I can actually drag and select all of these. I'll click on this distribute tool again, and we're good to go. Now a few shortcuts that you'll want to know is the number 1 on the keyboard will zoom everything into place, and the number 0 on the keyboard will zoom into 100%. So they're really nice toggles to jump back and forth in some zoom commands. Now that we have these frames set up, we want to enable a layout grid. So to do that, we can click and then hold down Shift and click the following objects here. We can also click inside of the layers panel, hold down Shift and click the bottom layer to select all of them. And you can see here in the design panel we have a layout grid section that we can just click this plus icon, and instead of a grid here, we can change the grid size to 15 pixels, we can change the opacity of the look, or we can jump into columns here. And I'm going to change the column count to 6. And I know I want the gutter to be 10 pixels in between the columns, and I also want a 10 pixel margin here in between the columns as well. And I tend to find this red color a little bit more pronounced than I'd like, so I'm going to change the transparency here to 5% just to hide that a little bit more. And now that I see this layout, I'm thinking I probably want the edges of the frame here to have a 20 pixel margin for content, so it's not writing right on the edge of that screen. So we still have the 10 pixels here in between each column, and this margin gives us 20 pixels on the sides. If you only select one of these and you edit the layout grid here, there's no way to really copy that style from this frame to this other one. So it's very important as you're setting these up to set them all up in the frames they're going to apply to. Now all of these frames are set to 375 pixels by 667 pixels, And that's the device screen size for the iPhone 8. But there are times where your design is going to go beyond the device screen where you'll scroll up and down. And so to resize these after they're created, for example, the home screen, you can click and drag this down and resize this. So I like to start everything at the device screen height, and then as I'm developing the shapes and the styles, if it starts to go past this screen, you can quickly click and just drag down to increase your frame size. Also, if you want to see more contrast between your frames and the background, for example, if your frames start out as gray, you may not see a contrast here between the gray background and the gray frame. So you can always click on this background setting here, and you can change this down or up. You can change it to really whatever color that you want. But I like to have it just this light gray color here. Let's begin adding and combining shapes to our design here, and we'll start off with this splash screen. So if you just hold down Z and draw a rectangle, you can zoom into the splash screen. And the first thing I want to do inside of this splash frame is draw a rectangle that's the same size as the frame here. And the reason why I want to do this is to change the fill color to this default red, but I also want to display an image inside of this shape. So I can click on this fill again, and I can fill this shape with an image. And here it's going to ask me to choose the image. And under the assets folder, you can choose any of these images that you'd like. I'm going to choose this entree lasagna JPEG here. So I can click open, and you can see that that's now the background of this frame, but I want to move this image fill down below this color fill. Now I want to change the opacity of this red fill to 90%, and I actually want to hide the layout grid here to make this a little bit easier to see. And so we have our first shape. It's this rectangle here. If we click and drag, you can see this rectangle snaps to the frame edges. And with rectangles or other shapes, you can click on these radius anchors to expand or decrease the radius of this shape. And if you want to manipulate the individual radiuses of this shape, you can hold down Option and drag, and that will only drag the radius in and out just for that one corner. We're going to leave those the same here. And now let's create a chef's hat icon. So we can do this by using a few ellipses. So I'll just draw some, and I'll hold down Shift so I can constrain the width and the height. And let's just drag this out something like this. And I'll hold down Shift to select all of these guys and make sure that everything's distributed correctly. And I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit more here. And this is going to take some playing around with, so maybe I will select this circle, and if you hold down Shift and the up arrow key, it will nudge this about 10 pixels each time that you hit the arrow key. So I've just nudged this up 20 pixels, and I've got a nice shape here. And now I'll draw a rectangle here for the bottom area of the hat. I'm just going to move this around just a little bit. And now if I want, I can click, hold down Shift, and select these three circles. I'm just going to group these for now so that when I hold down Shift and select this rectangle, I can align everything to the center, make sure everything's aligned really good, and I'll just hold down Shift Command G to ungroup everything now. So we can see these shapes. We have three circles and one rectangle, and that's making up our chef's hat. Now with this chef's hat, I actually want the corners here to have a radius. So I can do that by clicking on this radius anchor and changing that. I think 7 pixels looks good. And we have the starting of our chef's hat already. So all we need to do at this point is select all of these shapes by holding down Shift. There's 3 simple shapes. And we can come up here and we can see some settings for joining some shapes together, so for subtracting them, and you can play around with these to create some nice combination effects for simple shapes. So I'm just going to use the union selection, and now we have one simple shape. I can change the fill color of this shape if I wanted, or I could even remove the fill of this shape and add a stroke. And the stroke, let's make this white, and let's say I want this to be 10 pixels. So we have this acting as one shape here, but I can still double click to drill down into this, and you can see that it is actually behaving as 4 different shapes that are joined together, so I can still tweak this a little bit and give it a little bit more personality if I wanted. Make these a tiny bit uneven. It's just very handy to make some subtle changes there. The last thing I'm going to do for this shape, so I'll click in the Shapes tool and create a line. And I'm just going to click and drag holding down Shift. And I want to copy this same style. So I'm going to right click here and copy style. And now I'll right click on this image and paste this style. So we have a nice pasted style, but I want the ends of this line to be rounded. So I can jump into the advanced menu of the strokes and decide that I want the cap to be rounded. So I've got a nice rounded effect. And now I'm just going to select this line, hold down Option, and just drag down to get just one more line below that. And now I want to join all of this as one shape. So I'm going to hold down Shift while I'm selecting these 2 lines and this one shape. And now that I have these 3 selected, I can hit Command G, and that will all be grouped into one shape. Now if we scroll down and move over into the home frame, there are a few other icons that we can recreate with basic shapes here as well. So I'll just zoom into the top area here for some navigation icons. And we want a search icon here on the home page and also a menu icon. So the menu icon can be very simple. I can go back into the Shapes tool and click on Rectangle. And here I'm just going to quickly draw a hamburger menu. So I'm going to hold down Option here and copy this, leaving 6 pixels in between. And we can see that this shape is 41 pixels by 6 pixels. And I'll just make this an even 40 by selecting all of these rectangles and choosing 40 pixels in the design panel. And then I want this to have a little bit more personality, so I'm going to just decrease the size of these a little bit to make the menu icon look a little bit staggered. And the last thing I want to do here is I actually want these radiuses here on the right side to be curved. So zooming in here, if I want to do that and curve these edges, what I can do is select all 3 of these rectangles, and I can change the radius here. If I change this to 3 pixels, you can see that everything changes to 3 pixels. But what if I want to individually change the pixel sizes on each corner? Well, I'm going to undo this, and here this gives me control to change the radiuses for each corner, starting with the top left. So the top left we know we want to be 0, and the top right we want to be 3 pixels, and the bottom right we want to be 3 pixels. And then we want the bottom left to stay 0 pixels. So we have our hamburger menu here, and we can group this as well by just selecting everything and choosing Union Selection. And now we have this one icon. Here I can change all of it to be black, red, whatever color that I want here. So now we want to create a magnifying glass, and we can do that by going into the Shapes options here. I'm going to click on the Ellipse tool, and holding down Shift, I'll just drag and draw an ellipse. And we'll start out at 23 pixels. I think that's good. And we can actually remove the fill here by selecting on the outside of this row, clicking the Subtract, and then we'll add a stroke. And we want the stroke to be red. And I think inside the stroke is good. We can align this to the outside, to the middle, or the inside. We're going to keep it on the inside. And I'm going to have the stroke weight be 2 pixels here. Now I'm going to draw a rectangle. And 4 pixels is good. Maybe 4 pixels by 10 or 12. And we can change this later if we want. And the fill of this we're going to change to be the same red color. And I'm just going to select both of these and align them. So we have 2 simple shapes here. And you'll notice when I try to align this, this has 23 pixels, but this has 4 pixels. So we have an even width and an odd width, which is making it look a little bit staggered. So to change that, I'm just going to change the width of this to 20 pixels, so they're both even. I'll do an align again. And let's just nudge this up with our arrow keys. Now, one thing that you can do with rectangles or circles or any other shape, if I zoom in here, I can select this rectangle, and if I hold down Command, With my arrow keys, I can nudge up or down, and it will decrease or increase the size, whether it's the height, or if I use the right or left arrows, it's the width. So it's a very nice shortcut to nudge the sizes to get it precisely the way that you want. Now I'm going to add just a small radius here of 1 pixel around, so we have nice rounded corners on this magnifying glass. And the last thing we can do is select this fill and this stroke and choose union selection. It actually combines this stroke with the fill, which makes it quite nice. Now if I double click inside of here and I hold down Shift to select this circle, I'm just going to rotate the both of these at 45 degrees and hit return. And now we have this shape. This shape shows 25.85 pixels, and we want it to be an even 40 pixels. So I can click here to constrain the proportions and choose this to be 40 pixels. And now if I hold down Command and zoom out with my scroll wheel, you can see that it's proportionally the same width as this hamburger menu. So I'm going to bring this over here, and we have a nice starting out of a hamburger menu and a magnifying glass menu with some basic simple shapes. Now in the same home page, we can tap R for rectangle, and if I hold down Shift, I can constrain the size of this. And we want this rectangle to be 221 by 221, so we'll just match it with the columns here. And this is going to be where our image is going to live, but to the top right of this image, we're going to have a heart icon. So I'm going to just zoom in here, and to draw a heart, I'm going to click and drag I'll start out with a 10 pixel by 15 pixel here. And I'll make this white so you can see it. And the first thing we can do is change the radiuses of this heart. So this is going to be one side of the heart here. So the top left is going to be 5 pixels. The top right is going to be 5 pixels. And then these two at the bottom are going to be 0 pixels. Now we can hold down Option and copy this shape. I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees holding down Shift. Now I can align this here. And we can see we have a nice heart. So now we'll select both of these shapes, rotate this 45 degrees for our heart shape. And the last thing we want to do is hit this join button, and now we have a heart icon. And I want to change the fill of this to be removed, and I'm going to add a stroke, and this will be a white stroke. And let's try 2 pixels here. Now if I hold down Command and zoom out, we can see what that looks like and how this sits in relation to this image that we're going to have. So I can set this to the top right here, and then instead of using my X and Y values here to nudge this around, I can hold down Shift and just nudge this left 10 pixels and down 10 pixels, and it's sitting nicely now inside of this image. If you ever want to see the sizing or the relationship of sizing between two devices, you can select this heart, for example, and then just hold down Option, and you'll get these nice red indicators of how many pixels are between the edges of certain elements. And you can see here, because this shape is on subpixels, this nudged at 9.93 pixels. If you want to change that to be an even width, you can lock the proportions here, and let's just change this to maybe be 20 pixels wide. You can change that. And now let's try this again. Let's align this to the top right, hold down Shift, and left and down arrow. Now one last thing you might notice when we increase the size here, that doesn't increase the radius. What we should have done, if we undo this a little bit, is go to the Scale tool. And now using the Scale tool, you can scale this up and down, and the radius will also scale with it. The way that we did it before is we actually used the Move tool and tried scaling this, which resizes, but you can see those radiuses still stay at that 5 pixels. If you ever did accidentally resize it this way, and we can see that those radiuses haven't scaled, you can always double click inside of here, hold down Shift, and then just make a quick change, maybe set these to 10 pixels now, and you can see a nice rounded radius. So it's really nice to show you how to troubleshoot these things too, because it'll always come up as you're scaling things. You might wonder why the radius is or the strokes aren't looking good. So there's a big difference between just resizing and using that Scale tool. So now we know we want a 5-star rating system for our recipe. And under the Shapes options, we have this star tool that's really handy. So I'm going to just click and drag, and I'll hold down Shift to lock my ratio. And I can drag this any size that I want, and later I can come in here, lock my proportions. I'm just going to make this 16 pixels wide here, and let's zoom in. So I can either keep this style that it's given me, but I have a few controls to change the style to how I want this to look. And one of those is changing the counts here. I can change this to 3, 4, 5, or 30 count. And I can also change the ratio. So if I want to give these points a little bit more bulge, I can do that with this ratio anchor. And then I have a radius control. And I'll just zoom in here a little bit to show you how this radius control works. So if I push this down, you can see I have an option for 1 or 2 pixel radius. And so that seems like a bit much. So if you want something that's more subtle than that, you can still go into this design panel, and I'll just type 0.2 ratio just for a nice soft point here. And lastly, I want to change this fill to be a little bit lighter because this is the background of the star. And I'm going to zoom out, and holding down Option, I'll just copy this 4 times. And we know that this particular recipe is going to be 4.5 stars, so I'm going to select 4 of these stars, make them red. But how do we get half of this star to be red? Well, if you hold down Option and copy this, we've seen that we can combine shapes, but we can also subtract shapes. So we have this star, and we want to subtract a rectangle from the star. So I'm just going to drag a rectangle here. I'm going to snap it to the very center of this star. And I'm going to turn down the opacity here just to show you what's happening. So we have this rectangle that's overlaying this star. And so now when I select these 2 simple shapes, I can go in here and I can still use this union selection, but that just gives me one really weird shape. Or I can click in this down arrow and use subtract selection to subtract the rectangle from the star, which gives me a nice half star. If you'd like to see what the other options do, you can play around with that by just clicking undo, and we'll go and use exclude selection, which will exclude anything that's intersecting between the 2 selections. And we also have intersect. So anything that's intersecting, it will give us that right half of the star. So there's multiple ways that we can join or subtract shapes together. I'm just going to stick with this subtract selection here. And now I want to copy this style and paste the style on this star. And we see very easily we have this nice 4.5 stars. Now you can see here this star isn't quite aligning, and that's because instead of being a nice even 16 by 16 pixels, now that we cut it in half, it has a 7.3 by 13.85 pixels in here. So if we want to align this, we can still get past this by double clicking inside of here, and we'll just select both of these shapes inside of this join. And once we click both of the shapes, we can snap this to align with other shapes. It's just a weird quirk, but learning how to get past things like this will really help you save time in aligning things. Now we'll zoom out here to see the finished result. And we can select all of these shapes and use Command G to group all of them and just make sure they're centered here on the frame. Now these are just a few ways that we can use shapes. You see that we created a nice icon here, hamburger menu, search icon, and this heart here. Learning how to use the shapes tools and also the boolean tools that we see here give you a lot of power in creating the icons that you'd like. If you're following along from the previous video, feel free to use the same file as we continue designing. If you're just starting with this video, you can open up the Drawing Icons Using the Pen Tool Fig file. So now we're going to show you how to create icons using the pen tool, and we'll do this under the Recipe Details frame. So before we do that, I'm just going to hold down Option and copy some of these items here. And this heart, we're also going to reuse this over here on the top right. So I'm going to nudge this over, make it 10 pixels by 10 pixels by using the arrow key and shift to nudge this over. So we have a nice starting, and now there are 2 icons down below here that we want to create. So I'm going to zoom into this area, and if I click on this Recipe Details frame, I'm going to just hide this layout grid for now as we design these icons. So these icons that we create are going to live inside of a circle, and these circles are each going to be 36 pixels. So we'll just create a 36 pixel circle. We'll fill this with red. Now let's zoom in and let's create our first icon inside of here. So we can use this pen tool, and this pen tool we can just click certain areas to create straight lines. And if we want to close this shape, we just click on this last node here and it'll close the shape for us. So it's very simple to create straight shaped objects. And if I hit escape, it'll get me out of edit mode and I can delete this. But there are also times where we want to click and drag to create a curve. So I'll show you how this works here. Let's create a shopping bag, and we'll do that by clicking the pen tool, and I'm just going to click and drag certain areas here. And we have a bag shape, and I can click on this anchor here and just nudge this to make things even. Click this one, and that looks good. So now that I've done that, I also want to create a handle here, so I can click, and here I'll just click and drag, and it'll introduce us to some drag handles here. You can see here this drag handle is pushing this curve out to the left, this is pushing out to the right, and now I can click and end this. And if we ever want to change that, we can use this select tool right here, select this node. We can see these drag handles, and we can move these and change each one. And you can see how these are locked with the left and right handle. If I hold down Option, it'll break that link here so that I can drag this independently of the other one. So we can easily move these drag handles around and get the shape exactly how we want it. And once we're done using the pen tool, we've created a nice shopping bag icon. Now because I use strokes using the pen tool, if I decided to add a fill to this, it wouldn't look very good because you don't want the fill to be where the handle area is. So I'm going to hit Command Z or Control Z on the Windows, and I can still double click inside of here, and using this paint bucket tool, I can decide I want this area to be filled and not this area. So now that that area is filled, I'm going to make this fill black, and I will hit done here, and we have our shopping bag. Last thing we need to do is put it inside of this circle, and it looks a little bit too big inside of the circle, so I'm going to constrain the proportions, and I'll just make this 16 pixels here, and that looks like a nice size. And now I want to make everything white, so I'm going to change this fill to be white. I'll change the stroke to be white, and the last thing I want to do is double click inside of here. I can still select these nodes that I used in the pen tool. I'll hold down Shift to select just the 4 corners here, and I'm going to add just a 1 pixel radius to make those corners curved inside of there. Now if we hold down Option and we copy this circle, there's one more icon we're going to create with the pen tool, and that's the chef's hat icon. It's the same icon that we created on the splash screen, but I just want to show you how to create this using the pen tool. So I like to create it outside of this box first, and then we can fit it in later. So I'm just going to create the bottom of the hat here, do something like this, and then we can just play around with these kind of bulges on the chef's hat. And right here you can see that I have a left drag handle and a right drag handle. So if I let go and I want a shape to come around here now, I actually can't do that unless I hold down Option and select this to break the symmetry between these drag handles. So I can say I want this curve to start out here, and you can see it's given me a little preview of what that's going to look like. So here I can say I'll start here, and let's just click and drag. We'll hold down Option to break that symmetry again, and let's click and drag somewhere here and here. So you can see this hat is looking a little bit funky, but that's one really nice feature with this pen tool is we can click on this move tool inside of our edit mode, and very easily we can just adjust these and make the curves really nice. And maybe this we want to move over here. And so within just a few seconds we can kind of clean up those curves here. And it really doesn't matter if it has a huge amount of symmetry, because this looks more organic if you just play around with different shapes here. Move this down here. Bring this down. Starting to look pretty good. This looks a little bit flat. We'll decrease these a little bit. And then we want to select just these two nodes at the bottom. Add a 2 pixel radius. Bring this in. And something like that looks decent. So we have our chef's hat. And if I double click on this again to jump into edit mode, I'm just going to use the pen tool to create 2 more lines here. Hit escape to end that, and 1 more right here. And again, hit escape. We'll double click to end it. And we also want to jump into the advanced menus and cap this as rounded for these edges here. And we can now resize this to whatever size that we want and fit this inside of here. We'll make the stroke white. And now if you want to double click inside of this to go into edit mode again, the last thing we want to do is use this paint bucket tool to fill the inside of this with the color white. So now zooming out, we have a shopping icon and a preparation icon. So we'll just move these down here. If you want to design more free-form shapes, you can use the pencil tool. And you can find this tool here under this drop-down arrow next to the pen tool. You'll find this pencil tool. I'm just going to hold down Z and draw a rectangle here to just zoom into this area. So if you do have a Wacom tablet or something, I'm just using my mouse right now, so this text might be a little bit choppy, but you can kind of see how the pencil tool works here. If we just create some free-form cursive font, and the nice thing about this is, although the text is quite choppy, you can still jump into the move tool in here and double click on this shape, and you have access to all of these nodes. So I can select all of these, for example, and use this bend tool, and it'll try to help it become a little bit more curvy. Or I can select some of these nodes here, go under the vector menu, and delete and heal selection, and it'll make that a lot more curvy. I'm going to do the same thing over here, vector, delete, and heal. So you can see how much cleaner your shapes can be if you just spend a little bit of time after you start out a little bit rough. So like this one, for example, delete and heal, just makes that nice and curvy. Same thing here, delete and heal. And then from here you can still change things around. So it's a very nice combination to use that. Now if you want to use the pencil tool for tracing as well, then you can import images into your Figma file and then use the pencil tool to closely trace certain shapes. Now because I was using my mouse, this wasn't a great example of how to use the pencil tool. There is something that I love using with this pencil tool when I'm on my Mac, and that is the app called AstroPad and my iPad. So using my iPad, I can use it the same way as a Wacom tablet, or if you have a Wacom tablet with a pencil, you can do this same kind of thing, and you have more control over the look of this pencil shape. So here, very easily, I can just start creating some letters and easily hit undo if things don't make it the first round. And here you can see that this first pass looks a lot cleaner. So you can still use those vector menus to heal selections, to smooth join some selections, and to clean this up even further. But from here I can easily choose these shapes and align them the way that I want, resize them the way that I want, and get this look exactly how I want it. Last thing I'm going to do here is change the stroke to white, and let's just add a 3 pixel fill here and just align this a little bit better. Something like that will work good. And if you don't want all of these layers here to mess up your layers panel, just hit Command G and everything will be selected here. Now we have a nice handmade font. To show you how text and the text properties work, we're going to be adding some text into the recipe details frame that we created in a previous video. If you haven't followed along and just jumped into this video, then you can find this file under the Chapter 4 folder in your exercise files. So to save time typing up some text, I have a recipe prime rib text file that you can find in the assets folder. And here, let's just open this up and we can just refer to this as we crank along here. So the first thing we want to do is copy this text prime rib roast, and let's just click on this T tool here, and I'm just going to click in the general area and paste this in, prime rib roast. Now we can jump back into our text edit folder. Let's copy this summary text here, Command C or Control C on a Windows. And next time we use the T key, we're going to click and drag for a certain box that we want to surround this text with. And I can hit Command V here and paste this text inside of here. And we can already see that this page is going to be quite a bit longer than the others. So I'm going to drag this down here. And next, let's pull this down. I can copy some of this text by holding down Option. I'm just going to copy this down here, copy this down here. And this, I'm just going to call this shopping list. And I have this in all caps. And here I'm just going to put this lowercase preparation. I'm going to show you why I do that later. Next, let's copy this over, holding down Option. We can drag, and let's jump back into our text file here. And I'll copy this, paste it in here, hold down Option, and copy this and paste it in. So you could really type in anything that you want here. This is just some sample text to help you understand how the text properties works. So we have some one-liner text here that's pretty simple. If we click in here, if we want to make this bold, for example, we can choose bold. We can change the size to, let's say, 18 pixels here. And we can change the center justification here very easily and just center this with this icon here. Now I can already see I want this text to be the same as this one. So what I can do here is I can right-click and copy this style and paste the style directly into here, and I have the same center justification 18-point bold here. I can center that as well. And now what do we do about these ingredients and the preparation? Well, the first thing I want to do is just change this, maybe 14 point here, and you can see that this text is going beyond this bounding box here. So I can click and drag this to surround this, or I can click in this advanced menu and choose to auto resize the height based off of the contents in there. So now if I jump in here and I continue typing, that bounding box is going to resize. The next thing I can do here is add a paragraph line spacing. So this is your regular line height, and then this is your paragraph spacing. So I want to play with this a little bit. I'm just going to add 10 here. So I really like how this is turning out here. And I can do the same thing, copy style and paste style here. And that's looking really good. But notice here we already have some paragraphs here that were entered in the text. So we can go through and delete this to keep it accurate as far as the spacing goes. And here we have the same problem with the bounding box. So we can go into the advanced menu. We're just going to auto resize the height here. And it looks like we need to resize our frame to be higher as well. So I'm going to hold down Command, zoom out, and I can resize that. So let's just zoom back in here, make sure that our text looks good. And I actually want to increase the line height here to be maybe 110%, just to give a tiny bit more spacing. Now I can select these different elements and just position them. We've got 20 pixels here. I'll probably put maybe 50 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 50 pixels in between these two. And same thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we've got 50 pixels. So we already added some text, got a really nice sizing here. I'm just going to use Option Command C as a shortcut to copy this style, and Option Command V to paste this in the prime rib roast. So we've got that styling down here. And now I want to show you why I didn't capitalize this, but I did capitalize this. So if you type things in caps, it's hard to have control over changing the capitalization later. But if you have this all lowercase here, I can quickly go into a bunch of text in my design file, and I can go and choose to transform this text to all uppercase here. So you have a lot more flexibility in what that font is going to look like as you design further out. And lastly, I'm going to copy the style here and paste it right here. And I think that's looking really good. Now, I've already formatted all of this text, and rather than using the copy style, paste style a bunch of times, I might find out that later I want this text to not be completely black, but I want it to be a little bit lighter. So rather than clicking and trying to select everything in our artboard, we can click on one of these, go under Edit, and we can choose to select everything with the same style here. So it's selecting all of these three, and I can quickly go in here and say, now this style, I want the text to be just a tiny bit lighter. So something like this. And you can see that it changed that for these two, but this right here has something different. There's something different in the style, and that's the line spacing here. So Option Command C, Option Command V, and we have that same type of styling. What's really great though is you don't have to rely on one style for this entire text box field. So for example, as far as the amount of ingredients that we have here, I want this to be bold and I want that to be totally black. So once I change that, you can definitely see the difference between the amount and the actual ingredient. So I can do the same thing here. Make this black and bold. And we can change that independent of the other characters in this bounding box. Our recipe design is finally starting to come to life, and to help this along, let's add some images here in the home screen and the recipe details screen. To find the images we want to import here, let's go to the shape tools and go to place image. And here we can find our assets folder, and inside the assets folder there are a few entree images. So the first one I want to import is this prime rib JPEG. So I can click open here, and now if I hover over any of these boxes, I can place this inside of that boxed area. So I want to place it right here, but I also want to place that same image right here. So instead of going into the shapes tools again and going to place image, I can right click on this and go to copy style, right click on this area and paste style. And the reason why that works is because this is a fill style where the image was placed as a fill. Now there may be times you want to adjust the image within this square. For example, if I click on this square here, you can see how things resize and it kind of fits to fill. But if I double click inside of here, what I want to have happen is I want to move this image actually inside of this rectangle. Well, I can't do that because this is an image fill and not an image mask. But there are a number of ways I can get around this. So if I move this over here, and this is 220 pixels, let's put 220 pixels tall, and I can go to my rectangle tool. I'm going to create a rectangle again here that's 220 pixels, and I'll fine tune this here, 220, and just snap this to the edge here. So I've recreated this, and if I hold down Option Command and the left bracket here, I can move this clear down in the layer scheme. So that's just a quick shortcut. Option Command right bracket to bring it to the top, or left bracket to bring it to the bottom. That's the same as just dragging this around. Now I can click on this image, and if I click on this, hold down Shift and click on the image behind it, I can use this Use as Mask option here. And what that does is it sets this back rectangle here as just a mask. And so I can still click on this image and I can drag it around, I can resize it, and manually place this exactly how I want inside of this area. This may be nice if you place in the image and things are cropped out that you want to appear in the image, you want to slide something down or place it just right. You can do it this way, but there's also another option. So I'm going to hit Command Z a few times, and just to get rid of this rectangle here. And now we're back to just this image. Again, if I double click, I can't really move this around within the cropped area. But a quicker way of doing this is actually going into this image menu here and choosing crop. And now that I have crop enabled, I can still click on this image here and maneuver it and even resize this. So those are just two ways of masking the image, either using a crop or masking that image with another shape. For the most part, you're probably just going to want to go in here and choose crop, but some areas where you may want to use the mask, for example, is if you have a circle, and I'm just going to tap the O keyboard shortcut and draw a circle right here, and I'm going to hold down Option and copy this image, and with Option Command right bracket I can bring this to the top. So things like this, you can't use that crop setting, so I can still Shift click to select this circle with this image, and if I click on Use as Mask, now I have things masked within this circle or this shape. So there are multiple ways to do this, and some have better results than others in the application that you're using it. So I would just keep that in mind while you're using the crop or just the Use as Mask feature. Lastly, we have two other images here that we need to import, so I'm just going to go to my Assets folder here, and we'll import these two entree images. And you notice when I just drag them in from the Finder window, then they show up as really large. So I can just resize this down, and I can just Shift select this image here, Use as Mask, move this around how I want it to look. And notice when I drag this image outside of the frame, it kind of places this in the background, so you need to be a little bit careful of that. Just move this up here, and same thing here. I'm going to resize this a little bit. Imports is rather really large. Okay, and we'll select these two and Use as Mask, and let's bring this over here. And you can see this went outside of the frame, so I can just Command X, click on the frame, Command V, and make sure it's pasted back in the frame here. Now that we have these images all masked, the last thing to do is add a drop shadow and a corner radius. So here I'm just going to have a radius of 5 pixels, and we'll do the same thing on these images here, 5 pixels. And let's click on Effects, Drop Shadow, and we're going to just turn this down to maybe 2 pixels here. And then here we're going to add another drop shadow. And we'll add one more drop shadow. So we're adding 2 drop shadows here. One of them is a really sharp drop shadow, and then this one I want maybe 10 pixels and the blur to be 20 pixels. Something like this, and the shading to be 10%. So now we have all of our image masked. We have some nice shadow effects on those masked images, and everything's looking good. In a previous video, we created these icons like this hamburger menu and this spotlight here, and even these stars. But creating each little icon can sometimes be really cumbersome, and there are thousands of libraries out there that we can use inside of our design to get a design out quickly. You may also have some icons inside of Adobe Illustrator or as some images that you find on Google or other online resources, and those formats are very easy to drag and drop. So I want to show you a few ways that you can import some icons in here. And to do that, let's get started zooming into this home screen here. And now if we go into our assets folder, we see that we have an icon here. Now we have this icon in 3 different formats. We have Adobe Illustrator, PNG, and SVG. Now unfortunately right now, if I try to drag and drop this Adobe Illustrator file in here, you can see that this failed to import. So Figma doesn't recognize the Adobe Illustrator file completely, but if I double click and open this Adobe Illustrator file, we can see this comment vector graphic. And we can actually click Command C, we can go into Figma and click Command V, and this pastes the SVG directly inside of Figma. And this actually pastes this as a group, and if we drill down we can see this is actually a vector image. So the first thing we do when we import is just hold down Shift Command G a few times, and now we have this vector graphic all vectorized. If we zoom in here, we can still double click and edit this graphic exactly how we would if we created this inside of Figma. Another way that we can import this graphic is through a PNG. This is a portable network graphic. It's almost the same as an image, and we can see when we import this in, it's a raster graphic, meaning it's calculating the pixels here and behaves like an image instead of a vector graphic. The downside to something like this is you don't have the same editing capabilities as something like SVG or Adobe Illustrator files, where you can edit these and manipulate the files themselves. With the image, because this icon is an image, if we click inside of this area, we have some image editing controls, which doesn't work too well with just a black icon. And there are some ways to get around maybe the color of this. So we can still go into this image and add a fill, for example. And I can click inside of this and choose a solid fill. Let's say I want to choose the same red icon here. So I changed it to red, but what that did was it overlaid a red fill over top of the entire rectangle that this image is inside. I can hack my way into incorporating this red inside of this image by clicking on some of these overlay controls. And you can see that I have darken, multiply, color burn, and if I choose something like lighten, what that will do is apply this red on any dark element. So I can still change the color now, change this to any color that I want, but I have very basic editing controls. And now if I hold down Command and zoom out, you can see it still looks really decent as it's smaller, but if I want to use this as any larger size here, I'm going to get that pixelation. For the most part, you're going to want to edit all of your icons in SVG and find SVG files. And that brings us to our last file format. This is SVG. So if you're in a program like Adobe Illustrator, you can export any of your icons or graphics into SVG, and that behaves the same way as copying and pasting. So I still have this where I can change this color to red, and I can double click inside of here, and I have the same editing controls, and it's very handy. So I'm going to delete these, and I'll use this little comment icon. And we want to have 2 other icons. We want a heart and a timer. So in order to get those icons, there's a tool that's really handy, and this is a tool I use all the time. If you go to icons8.com, you can search for any kind of icon here. So I'll just search for heart, and you can see how many versions of the heart icon that we have. And same thing with the timer. So I'll just type in timer here and hit return, and I have multiple timers. Now Icons 8 is free. It's free to download these icons as a PNG, and remember that PNG is not very editable. So if you want SVG access, there's a paid version, and if you click see pricing here, we can see that it's $20 a month, and it gives you access to hundreds of thousands of graphics. Whether you get the free version or the paid version, they do have a desktop app, and this app is actually right here, this Icons 8 menu bar. So if I click on that, you can see that this pulls up right inside of my Mac, And if you have the free version, again, you only have this PNG option where you can drag and drop PNGs inside of here. But because I have a paid version, SVG, I can quickly search for icons like heart, and I can find something like this. I think that looks good. And now I want to find a timer. I can just type timer, and I like this one. I'm just going to drag and drop this inside. And you can see the difference between this PNG graphic and this SVG. Lastly, I'm going to select these two and just hold down Shift-Command-G to ungroup this a few times. And now I want the height of all of these to be the same. So I'm going to lock the proportions. I'm going to make the height, let's just say 20 pixels for now. And you can see even though the height is 20 pixels, they're not proportionally to scale. So what I like to do is match the height first and then do some visual balance. So we probably want this to be somewhat smaller here. And if I was to focus more closely on matching the icons, I'd probably have a timer with a thinner weight on it, but this is good enough, I think. And let's do something like this. And we can change this fill to this red color here. And now let's zoom out. Let's set the comment over here, the heart here, and the timer over here. I'm just going to add a little bit of text, clicking the T key. And I'll just call this 5 hour. 685. And 107. So I'm just going to make sure that these are about 4 pixels away from the icon. And I just like to nudge with my arrow keys. Once I hold down Option, I can kind of see what that spacing looks like. And now I'll align this to the center and group these as one object so that I can align and distribute them evenly. Okay, now that we have this set up, I'm just going to move this down to be a little bit more balanced. We have some nice icons here from Icons 8, from Adobe Illustrator, and ones that we've created. Last thing to do here is delete this PNG graphic, and we should be all set. Let's talk in more detail about color, and to start off with this video, I want to show you something really cool. Now, over the course of these videos, we've been using this same color red here throughout a lot of our artboards. So what happens when the primary colors need to change mid-design? Well, we can click on this icon here because we know that we use the same red as we've used across the rest of this project. And it's as easy as clicking this edit button right here. We can choose to select every object in this file that has the same fill. So now all of this is selected, and I can choose to change this fill to blue, and automatically our entire project now has this blue style guide incorporated. So that's one really quick way to test out new colors and new styles across many artboards in your project. I'm just going to click this, go back to select all with the same fill, and I'll choose to change this back to red here, and you can really change it to any color that you want. So that's just one powerful way of using some of these filters to select things. It's the same thing with stroke or different shadow effects. If you want to change the shadow effects across the project, that all works the same way. And now with this background color here that we created for the splash screen, that's this rectangle right here. We can see that we already added a color fill over top of an image fill, but we can add multiple color fills. So I can click on this plus icon, click on this little color thumbnail, and we have a number of options to add more color to the design. So I'm going to click on radial here, and we can see that we have a nice radial image with some anchor handles here to control the width of this radial and also the height here, or the size. And we can change the opacity here, so I'm going to change this to 30%. Let's try 60% here, just to make it a little bit brighter. And again, if I click in here, I can decide where the beginning and end point is of this. So maybe if I want to start inside this hat here, and then I can have the end point something like this. And the width, I want it to be a little bit wider. And you can really just play around with this, and you can have a combination of different effects here. Now inside of the color panel itself, if we click on this fill, for example, we have a number of ways we can control the color. We have the color controls down here and the saturation controls in here. We also have the hex value. So if you have any other colors that you want to copy from any other program like Adobe Illustrator or anywhere else, you can paste them as a hex value, or if they're RGB, you can paste those in here. You also have CSS values. So if you have CSS properties that you want to copy and paste in here to copy those colors, you can do that. And then the HSB values. So there are a number of ways that you can add, copy and paste colors or paste them outside of here into other projects. Another way we can use colors, let's go into this recipe details frame here, and let's look at just this prime rib roast title here. So I'm just going to zoom in, and let's say we spend a little bit trying to find a good color for these headers. I'm going to start out with this blue color here, and that looks decent, but it's not dark enough for me, so I'm just going to pull this down just a little bit. And we can see that looks like a really good color in contrast with this red, and we have the hex value here. So we could copy this hex value, and we can paste this anywhere else we want to copy that same color. So I can click inside of here and just do a quick Command V and enter, and we can paste it that way, but we know that we're going to reuse this throughout our project quite a bit. So if I want, I can scroll down here, and you can see that I have a few color choices. This is the document colors. So these are all the colors that have been used in the document, and I can just click here to copy that same color. Or I can choose personal colors. These are in my personal collection. Every time I open Figma, this is going to be the same palette of colors. And then I have a chef team colors. Now you remember in a previous video we created a new team for this recipes app. So by doing that, we can save this color inside of the color palette anywhere that we want. I'm going to save this inside of my personal colors as well because I really like this color. So now, because it's in my personal colors, I can create a new file here. This file is completely separate from the other file we were working on. And if I just draw a rectangle for demo purposes, I can click on fill, go into my personal colors, and I still have that same color that I can reuse throughout multiple files now. You may also notice that we have an opacity control here, and when we dial this left and right, we can see that that changes here. So you have quick access to change the opacity here or down here. So I'm going to leave this at the dark blue. And one final way to grab and reuse color is if we have a color inside of an image, for example, that we want to reuse, we can't just double click in here and find out what the fill color is for an image. But let's say there's some green inside of here that we want to reuse inside of our project. Well, we can click on any piece of text, and I can hold down Control C and get this little eyedropper, and it'll show you the hex value here on the top right as you're moving along your mouse to the different colors. Or if you click on this color thumbnail, you can see that same control here, this eyedropper control. So I'm going to click on this eyedropper tool, and I'm going to choose to select a color somewhere around this area here. And so very quickly you can grab a color like that and you can save that in your palette for later if you want to use it. I actually really like this blue color, so I'm going to click back in this color palette, and you can see when I clicked on it, I'm actually using the eyedropper tool still, but it gives me the same hex value. So those are a few ways you can use the color panel inside of your fill or inside of your stroke. In this video we're going to start designing a recipe completed screen, and by doing this we're going to illustrate some of the style effects that we can create on a pop-up overlay. Before we go through how to add styles, I want to go over here to the recipe details screen, and I want to copy some of these things over to recipe details complete. So I could just hover over these elements and copy and paste onto this artboard, or I can click on this artboard itself, and if I go to export here, I can click on this export, and I'll just export this at 2x, and we can see a preview here of what it's going to look like. And let's go ahead and export this as a PNG, and you can export this anywhere that you want. I'm going to export this on my desktop, And now I want to bring it back into the project, so I can click on the Shapes tools, click on Place Image. And if I jump into my desktop, you can see the recipe details here. I'll just click Open. And now I'll place this right inside of here. And we can scale it however we'd like. And here, this doesn't look exactly how we want it to. And remember, if we click on this image thumbnail, we can use this crop feature and just pull this down so we see the top of it. And all this is an image. Hit return here. And now let's click inside of here. I'm just going to nudge this over to make sure that we have the layering correct. And now we copied this image inside of here. And the reason why we did this is we want to create an overlay effect for a pop-up menu. Now to create the overlay color, we could click inside of here and add a fill that's a black solid fill, for example. And we can do that and turn the opacity down to 40% to show that it's overlaid. But if we do that, we can't add some effects to just this fill here. So instead of doing that, I'm going to click on this row and hit subtract. And now I'll create a rectangle, drag this over here, and I want to create that same black fill with just a subtle opacity here. And then one nice thing that I can do here is I can use this effects tool, and instead of a drop shadow, I actually want a background blur. So I want the background of anything behind here to be blurred out. And then I can change this to 20 pixels here to help it become really blurry. And now I can change the opacity here. Let's try 20% or 30%, and we can play with that as much as we want. In fact, I may choose to have this white here. So now we have a blurred white background, and if we drag this rectangle here, you can see what it's doing. It's blurring everything behind this rectangle shape, and I think that's looking really good. And now we want a pop-up window telling us that our recipe is completed. So we can create another rectangle here. And I'm just going to make it maybe 240 by 300 right now. And we'll bring this down to the center. And this may be resized as the content fits in it. And we're going to add new content in a future video. So now I'll just change this color to white. I will add a 5 pixel radius to all the corners. And it's starting to look good, but we can see that there's very little or no contrast around the edges here. So one of the first things we want to do here is just add a subtle stroke. And then we want to jump into our effects once again. And this time we just want to add a subtle drop shadow. And 4 pixels looks good. 4 pixel blur, it's down 4 pixels, and 25% looks decent. Now we may want to add another shadow down below that's a lot more blurry, making this feel like it's popping out of the page quite a bit more. So if we want to do that, we can add another drop shadow inside of here. We can have this be 20 pixel blur, and we can see that that's really popping that off the page. And that's starting to look really good. I'm just going to decrease the opacity here. And so this is starting to look really good. But another thing we can do to really help pronounce this pop-up is draw a rectangle here to use as a shadow. And we'll just make this a little bit smaller than the rectangle here. And I'm just going to bring this down a few layers. There we go. And this rectangle can actually serve as a shadow. And to do that, we can change this color to black. And now if we jump into, and we can change the radius, let's change this to 30 pixels here. And now if we go into effects, instead of a background blur or a drop shadow or inner shadow, let's do a layer blur. So it's only blurring this actual layer. And here we want this blur to be 30 pixels. Let's start out at 30. And let's try maybe 50 pixels here. So that's looking really good. And then the actual opacity of this fill, let's change this to 15%. And you can hardly see that, so I'm going to try 30%. Sometimes it's just trying a few numbers to see what works. So that's starting to look decent here. And we can just fiddle around with the sizes. And what exactly we like, and I'm going to change this to multiply. And let's just tweak this a little bit more to see what we like. Something like that should be good. So we have a nice completed screen here. We have some drop shadow effects, some layer blur effects, and some background blur effects here. And you can really play with a combination of these effects to get some really nice designs. The components feature is one of my favorite features inside of Figma, and you'll quickly understand why as we move along this video. So until now we've been creating a bunch of icons that are basic shapes inside of Figma. And one drawback from that is if I hold down Option and copy this over here, and I decide to change the style of this, for example, if I zoom in here and move this to be a little bit wider here, it doesn't change anywhere else. So I'll have to go in and copy and paste this across different frames. Now if I want, I can choose a lot of these icons here. I'm going to name this to Button Menu, and I'll name this to Button Search. And now I can click on any of these elements and click on this Create Component. And now if I go to my Components panel, you can see I have these two components here, and I can reuse these anywhere that I want. And that's really handy, so I can drag and drop this on any frames that I want. And now if I click on this master component and I change anything that I want, the color or anything else, it changes everywhere that I have those copied. I'm going to undo this, and we'll remove those. And I'll show you a more powerful way of using components. For example, we have this 5-star rating system. So what if we had a component that we can reuse and we can change this 5 stars to be 1.5 stars, 2.5 stars, or whatever. So first thing I'm going to do is click and ungroup all of these. And what I want is I want an unfilled star. So I'm going to choose this star here. And then I want a filled star. So I'll choose this star and I'll overlay this. And I want to move this up inside of my layers panel. I want to move this just up above the other one. So now we have a light gray star and then a red star. And I'm going to just call this star hyphen unfilled. And then I'll call this one star hyphen filled. Now I'll align these, and the last one that we have here, I'm going to make sure this is clear up at the top here in the layer system. So if I scroll up here, let's bring this to the top of the home page, and I'm going to align this. And remember, this doesn't align too well now that it's on subpixel, so I can still double click inside of here and just select these two shapes underneath this, and I'll align that to snap. And then I will call this star hyphen half hyphen filled. So we have the three versions of this star that we're always going to need: fully filled, unfilled, and a half filled. So I can select these objects here, and let's just move this up to make sure that their layers are close to each other. And now that I've done this, I have my naming scheme good. In fact, I have some capital letters here. I'm just going to change this to be all lowercase just for uniformity. It really doesn't matter. But I'm going to click on these three layers now, and I'll click Create Component. And I can call this master component star. So now if I copy this 5 times, I'm going to hold down Option and copy this 5 different times. These child components have layer overrides, so I can click on any of these stars here, and I can choose to hide the half filled icon and also the filled icon right here. So now we have this unfilled icon. I can do the same thing here, hide these 2 layers, and let's say this is 2.5 stars. So here I want to keep this half star filled visible, but I want to remove this star filled underneath it, and we have 2.5 stars. Now I can delete these guys here. These are just simple shapes. And I have these 5 child components. And now I can center these here in the center of this artboard. And I'll actually create another component here. And the reason why I didn't include this master component inside of here is because you can't nest master components inside of other components. You have to use child components. So you create one master component, and then let's copy all of these and click Create Component again. And I'm going to call this 5 stars. So this is a new master component. I'm going to zoom out, and we can just place this master component outside of the frame here because we don't want to show it inside of our design. Now I can delete this 5-star system over here and copy this master component, hold down Option, and I'll copy this over here. And now the really nice thing is this is a child component, but I can still drill down inside of here and choose this star here in the middle. I'm going to make this filled, and I can make this one here half filled, so we can change it very quickly. But now if we go in here and decide to give this a little bit more spacing, I can still click on each of these objects and I can just nudge this around, and you can see over to the right this is also being updated. So I'm changing this one master component here, and the spacing is applied over here. If I ever want to change the color of this star here, of the half star and the full star here, I can just select both of these components. So I'll choose star half filled and star filled, and I'll decide maybe I want these to be yellow. So as soon as I change that to be yellow or gold, I can now zoom out and everything is changed here. So very easily and very quickly we created components within components, and we can do the same thing with these guys here. So if I click and ungroup these, Shift Command G to ungroup, or you can right click inside of different areas here and just choose ungroup. Now I want to create one component with all of these objects. So all I have to do is bring these down here and just align them to the center of each other. And I'm going to name these after I ungroup them all the way. Icon comment. And I'll move these out of the way so I can see which one I'm renaming. So this is the icon timer, and this is the icon heart. Now we can grab all three of these and align the middle and the center. And because we have all of these now, we can choose to create component, and let's just call these icons. And now if we hold down Option, we can move this, and if we click this arrow in the layers panel now, we can decide that we want to only show the timer here. We'll hold down Option and drag over here, and here we want to show the heart. And let's drag one more time, and here we want to show the comment. So now at any time with this master component, you can resize this, you can move this around here in the components area, and you can change the styling, replace them, and it's a great way to organize your icons this way so that you can toggle on and off within this layers panel. Now we can see that we have this master component icons, and we also have this master component, which is the star. And we don't really want this inside of our frames because we're only using the child components here. So we can click on this page view and click New Page, and this is where I like to create a page called Symbols. And if I click back to page 1, I can click and drag here and just right click and move this to Symbols here. Now if I ever want to see where the master component is to edit this, I can right click inside of here and click Go to Master Component, and it jumps right to the symbol page and tells me here's where it is. And now if I click on this and I add a stroke, for example, and I know that looks really ugly, but just for demo purposes, let's go back to the page 1, and we can see that that changed here as well. So I'm going to right click, go back to Master Component, and if I hold down Command, I can go into this group and remove this stroke here. We'll go back into page 1, and we can see that that's updated. So I would recommend storing your master components inside of the symbols Or you can name this components to match what they really are. I actually named them symbols because I'm used to Sketch app where the components have a different name, and that is symbols. So now this is renamed to components. We have all of these icons here set up as components. These are set up as components. And we can do the same thing here. This could be one component or they could be two. So we can click on here, click create component, and we can name this shopping. Create this component and preparation. Now the last component we want to create is this heart button. So I'm going to call this button heart. And we'll click create component here. Now there are times that this heart's going to be filled or unfilled. So now that we've created a component, I'm going to zoom into here. And this is the master component, but we can still click inside of here. We can see that we have a button heart inside of this master component. I'm just going to name this heart outline, and if I use Command C and Command V to paste this, I'm going to name this one heart filled. And the only thing I'm going to change here, if I double click on this icon, you can see I have these two shapes that I merged. I actually want to bake this in, so if I click on this heart filled here, I'm going to go to Object and Flatten Selection, and that will bake everything as one shape. And now I can click inside of here, add a white fill, and even remove the stroke here. So we have one filled heart and one outlined heart. And anywhere we have this heart saved, we can always toggle that on and off using these layers. This is also a basic shape, so we want to delete this. We can click on this master component here, and again hold down Option and copy this over here, and it creates a child component. And again now we can change the layering inside of here. We can change this to be filled if we want and this to be unfilled. And because it's the same component, if you ever change the color or style in the master section, it'll also change here. Now let's scroll down here and we'll see this preparation window here. If I just squeeze this down a little bit to give some room over here, I actually want to have each preparation area, I want to have an icon here that represents the steps. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'll show you how to create some nice components for this. So the first thing I'm going to do is click O for this ellipse, and I'll just create a 20 pixel by 20 pixel circle here, and I actually want this color to be the same color as that unfilled star. So I can come back over here, I can double click inside of here, and if I choose this star unfilled, I'll right click and copy style. I'll come down here, right click and paste the style. So that looks good. And I'm going to add some text inside of this. So this text is just going to say 1. And we're using Roboto here. You can use whatever font that you want, but I'm going to make this bold here. And I'll create this to be red text. And if I zoom inside of here now, I'm going to move this to be centered. And I'll just change the width of this and the height of this to match. And I'm going to sit this text right in the center of this circle. So we have 1, and I can group this and call this step number. And then I want to hold down Option and copy this, and let's say this step is completed. Well, now we want to double click in here until we select this circle here, or this ellipse, and let's fill this color to be red. And I'm going to remove this text, and now I want to create a check mark icon. So very easily I can use this pen tool, and I'll just click and create a check mark. Something like this will be good. And I want the stroke to be 2 pixels. And now I want to cap the ends. I want them to be rounded. I'm going to change the color here to be white. Hit escape a few times. I accidentally created a new shape out here I'm going to delete. Okay, so we have that check mark. I'm going to just balance this, center it here in the circle. And sometimes because it's a little bit offset, you kind of have to eyeball it. But I'm going to hold down Shift and let's just align this horizontally. So we have this step completed. So now I'm going to drag this vector shape into this other step number group. Instead of naming this step number, I'm going to do step complete. Okay, so now we have our step number and our step complete. We can do the same thing where we align this here to the top. We're going to select both of these and we're going to create a component, and we'll just call this icon steps. Now because this is a master component, I'm going to hold down Option and drag this down to create a child component, and then again I'm going to right click and move the master component to the page components, and now I can use all these child components. So I'm going to click inside of here, remove step complete, and now I just have this step number. But one thing that's really nice is I can hold down Option and copy this a few times, and I can still go inside here in this text, and if I double click a few times I can change the number here to 1, 2, 3, and watch this. If we change this to step 22, we see that there's not enough padding around here, and we've already committed to our design here, and it's going to take a lot of work to go in here and change all the sizes here of the fonts to kind of help this padding to be correct. But because we created components, we can still right click and jump to master component, so we can see that the master component hasn't changed. If we double click inside of here and we choose this group, I'm going to move this away and you can still see where it says 1, so that text that we changed is just overridden in those child components. It's not going to change here. But just for this master component, I'm going to hide this. And now I can click on this font inside of the master component, and I can choose to resize this to 12. And maybe let's try 10 here. So we resize this to 10. I can jump back into my pages, and you can see it fits a lot nicer. Now we could have clicked inside of just this number inside of here. If we wanted this text to be larger and just this text to be smaller, we can click inside of here and change this to even be 48 pixels, for example. That's way too large. I'm going to choose 14 pixels. And you can see that this changed and none of these changed. That's because if you change anything in a child component, that's actually going to override that change. And when you change the master component now, if you change the size, it'll change the size of all of these, but it won't change this because you've overridden that size. If you want to ever change this back, you can double click inside of this text area, and you can go back into this little button here, this instance button, and you can choose to reset all overrides. So right now we overrode the name, so we typed in 22 and that's different than the master component. We overrode the text, we overrode the text style, so we can choose to not reset the text, but we can reset the style, and that brings it back down, and we could reset the name if we wanted, but I'm just going to leave that. And I can see that these are sitting a little bit high to the circle. So I'm going to right click and go to master component again. And if I double click on this text, let's just have this sit down just a little bit, something like this. And let's jump back into our pages and see if that looks better. I think that looks a little bit better here. So now going down the list, I'm going to just change this to 4. And let's say that these steps are complete here. So I'm just going to mark this as complete. And the first few steps we'll just say are complete here. And we'll align this here with the top of this text. And let's say it's all but the last is complete. And these are a little bit too many steps. So I know if you try to follow this recipe, you're probably going to screw up because I'm going to delete a bunch of mid text inside of here, but this is just for visual representation. And I don't want the artboard to be that long, so I'm just changing this, just deleting a little bit of these steps. So let's just have, 3 or 4 steps here. So 3 of them are completed, and this 4th one is not. Now I want to make sure things are lined up correctly, so I'm going to hold down Option. We can see there's 31 pixels here. I actually want to nudge this so there's only 20 pixels here. And then I want 10 pixels to be in between here. So we'll nudge this 1, 2, hold down Shift and nudge it once. And now we have 10 pixels. And then I want this side to be 20 pixels, so I'm going to hold down Command and nudge this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so everything looks good. And we have our steps. Now let's zoom out here and take a look at this. This is all looking really good now. And to match the alignment here, this shows 14 by 14. I'm just going to line this here with the edge here. And I'm going to nudge this holding down Command, left arrow, and Command Shift, left arrow once more. So we have a 20 by 20. So we can see this is aligned really good. And I'm going to align these with the edges here. So those are components. We've now converted all of our icons to components here, and they're ready to be reused throughout all of the other designs. For example, I'm just going to hold down Option here, and I'll just move this over here because I know we're going to use the same kind of 5-star scheme inside of this design in the future. Again, now if we click on this Components panel, you can see all of our components here. We have 6 components on our home page, and we have 3 components here under the Components background. In most cases nowadays, we're designing for multiple device screens. And this starts to become a challenge translating how the paddings and margins and layout will look to the developers as they're developing these screens for the different device sizes. Well, Figma has a really nice tool to help this become much easier to export multiple screen sizes and not having to design for multiple screens, but using constraints so you can stretch this frame and see exactly what it's going to look like at that size. And you'll notice when I stretch this right now, things look a little bit broken and they're not exactly resizing the right way or the way that you would intend. So I'm going to click Command Z, and that's what we're going to do is we're going to set up this frame here to be responsive. We're going to set up constraints for all of these elements. Now before we do that, I'm going to just zoom into these 2 artboards here, and I want to just hold down Option and copy some elements over here to kind of complete this design. Move this down here. I'm going to have this centered. And if we were really focusing on this design, I would get the padding exactly right and the spacing. But just to save some time, I'm just going to do this, and we can work on that a little bit later. Now I'm going to add just a few more elements here. I'm going to hold down Option and copy this up here to be aligned with the center of these icons. I'm going to call this Popular Recipes and make this the same red color here. And go down once more. We'll call this Entrees. Over here, Appetizers. Hold down Option once more and call this Dessert. And I want these all to be a subtle gray here, and we'll probably make this 13 point and regular. And because this is the one that is selected right now, I'm going to make this black and medium. And using the L key, I'm going to draw a line just below this. And let's make this 2 pixels. And let's cap off the ends with a rounded end here. I'm just going to give this, going to center this. Command G to group it and center it with the artboard. And then I'll ungroup it here, Shift Command G, and I'll give these 30 pixels in between each. And that's just nudging these, holding down the Shift and the arrow keys. So now if I hold down Option, you can see that there's 30 pixels in between, and we can easily see the entrees are selected. Just changing the sizing and the padding here. It really doesn't matter too much. You can move this around however you want. And I think the last thing I want to do is hold down Command G and center this with the artboard, Shift Command G to ungroup. So now we have this design near completed, and we want to make this responsive. So the first thing we do is test this out. We can see that things are broken here. So going down one by one, let's just fix this top area right here. So we know we want this icon to be constrained to the top left of this frame. So now when we try this, we can see that's exactly what we want it to do here. We're going to hit Command Z to resize this back to where it was. And now this popular recipes, we want to center this with the frame. And instead of the left top, we want this to just be centered. And we want it to sit at the top. And sitting at the top means if I scale this down, it's just going to stay there. If I change this to sit at the center, what it's going to do is center this where it's at here between the top and the bottom. So let's change this back to top center. And then this guy right here is going to be right top. So now we have our header area behaving exactly how it should. And now we have to deal with these guys. So if I want to apply a constraint to everything, I can select all of these layers and click Command G or Control G on the Windows. And I'm going to name this categories. And now I want this also to be centered and sit at the top. So now we have this group as centered, and we can resize this, and we can see that it is centering each element on the artboard, but that's not exactly what we want. It's centering relative to this frame, but if we want to create a new frame around this, we chose to group this, and we named this group category, but let's convert this group to its own frame. And this is what we call a frame within a frame, so that we can set the constraints only within this frame, and it's independent of what we set in this frame. So I'm going to click on this group, and you can see that it's a group here, but if I can change this to a frame instantly by clicking on frame right here. And so now this is its own frame, and these objects are going to be centered within this frame itself, not within this frame. So now we have a left top constraint here. We're going to center this frame for the top and center. And now when we stretch this, we can see that's precisely what we want to have happen there. Command Z. And now we're working our way up to these images here. So I can group these items, Command G, because we want these to stay within each other. And I want this to be center top. And we can see that that behaves correctly. And now let's move these images inside of that same group. So we have this group up here. I'm going to select both of these with Option Command and right bracket. I'm going to move these to the top near this other one. So now we have these two masked groups, and this group I'm going to move to the top as well. And holding down Command and selecting both of these, I'm just going to move them inside of this group here. So now we have all of these grouped. And same thing, center top. And again, we have to convert this into its own frame. So now that's working correctly. And we have this, a component works the same way as a frame, where we can just choose to create this at the top center, and it's not going to stretch like a group does. Now I can resize this, that always stays centered. And the same thing over here. So you can select multiple things at once if you know they're going to have the same alignment properties. And I'm just going to make sure that this is already centered on the artboard here. There we go. And again, center top. And these are the last things here. So first of all, just making sure that it has the right spacing that you want initially. That's probably pretty good. We'll move these down just a tiny bit. And now we can select all of these, Command G to group, change this group into a frame, and let's center this. And the last thing with this text, we actually want this to be pinned to the left and right. So we want it to always be 20 pixels on the left, 20 pixels on the right. And same thing here, we can actually stretch this here, depending on if the text increases or decreases, we still want it to have 20 pixels on the left and right. So we're going to choose left and right here. And now check this out. This is for the iPhone 8. If we want to look at the 8 Plus, we can look at that very easily. Look at the iPhone 5S, or if we have the Galaxy Note or whatever, we can change the size, and very easily your developers can see exactly what you intend this to look like during development for multiple screen sizes. You can also change the width here, so 375, and you have the option here, because it's turned into a frame, I can decide I want to see what it looks like on the Galaxy S8. That changes proportionally, and the same thing, I can choose maybe a 7-inch tablet. What does that look like here? So you can see that you have that nice width for the 7-inch tablet. I'm going to change this back to the iPhone 8. So once you get the hang of setting up constraints, it's just a matter of testing things once you set them up, making sure that things are flowing correctly. And once you really do get the hang of this, it takes probably 2 minutes to convert something like this into a responsive design. So before we move into the next video, I would like you to go through this artboard here. This may be a little bit simpler to set some things like this up. I'm going to just center this. But just go through here and just set the constraints here for this frame. And again, you can always test it out by just stretching things. You can already see that some things are broken, like this image here. So if I hit undo, this image would just be pinned left to right, or left and right. And we can see that now that's fixed. So just go through and change some of those things on your own and see if you can get this to behave and perform the way that you'd like. Because Figma's design files live on the cloud, you don't have the conventional save features that you do in normal local files. You can click on File and Export here to export certain files, but for the most part, once the Figma file lives inside of your Figma instance and you have collaborators designing with you, everything is just saved instantly. Now there may be times you want to jump back inside of your history and find a certain way that you may have styled something that you want to retain, and that's where versioning control comes in with Figma. So we have this file here, version control, and to go into your version control, just click on this little arrow here right next to the file name, and you can see show version history. So if I click on here, you can see a few snapshots of time where I've designed this. And you may not see this same version history, and that's because once I click File, Export to export this into the exercise files, then it suppresses or it hides all of these versions and you only get the latest state. These versions only pertain to after you load this into Figma and you begin designing with it. So very easily I can click and see what this looks like at 12:26 p.m. or 10:54 p.m. or December 17th, for example. So you can click in and see the progress here, and if there's something that you like within this design, you can duplicate this instance. So duplicate this file to show just this instance, and you can copy and paste some things back and forth, or you can restore the file. If you say this is the latest version that I don't like what I've done in the last hour, you can change that and just restore this actual file to this version. And then again, you can see the current version here. So that's versioning history, and if you notice the notes down here, you have a 30-day version history, and if you want more than that, you'll have to upgrade to the paid program. Once you're done checking this out, you can click back to editing and begin editing where you left off.